I want you to take a second and just try to imagine your mind as a physical space. Like, really picture it. What does it look like in there?
Oh, that is a big question right off the bat.
Right. But seriously, is it this pristine, well-organized library where every single thought and moral and memory has its own perfectly labeled shelf?
I wish mine looked like that.
Yeah, same here. Or is it maybe a little more like a chaotic, completely cluttered storage unit? Just boxes of anxieties and old experiences stacked all the way up to the ceiling.
Definitely leaning toward the storage unit for most of us, I think.
Honestly, yeah. But okay, hold on to whatever image you have, but pivot with me for a second to a completely different physical space. Picture a house that is currently under construction.
Okay, a construction site. Got it.
Yeah, so you've got the concrete foundation poured, you have like the 2x4s framing the walls, but there is no roof, there's no furniture, and absolutely no one living there.
It's an empty frame.
Exactly. So what do these two completely different physical spaces, right? A cluttered storage unit and a half-built house. What do they have to do with the fundamental nature of the human soul?
Well, I mean, it sounds like some kind of surrealist riddle, right? But those two specific spaces are actually the perfect entry point into the philosophy we're unpacking today.
That's just going to be quite the journey for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. So today we are looking at two translated essays by a philosophical author named Shui Feng.
Right.
The first one is a piece from 2011, and it's called Reincarnation and Abortion. And the second one is from 2017, titled Clear the Passage of Life.
Okay, and before we go a single step further, I mean, we really need to lay down a very firm ground rule for you listening right now.
Yes, very important.
Because as you just heard from the title of that first essay, our source material today deals directly with the deeply charged, politically and morally complex topic of abortion.
It is a very heavy topic.
It is. And so we are stating unequivocally, right up front, that we are not endorsing any viewpoints here. We are not taking sides on any political spectrum whatsoever, and we are absolutely not making any moral judgments.
Exactly. Our role today is strictly to act as your impartial guides to this text. We're just here to map out the highly unconventional and sometimes controversial internal logic contained within the author's original essays.
We're basically just looking at the blueprints.
Precisely. We are looking at the architecture of his ideas to understand how he defines what a life is, when it actually begins, and how it should be lived. Nothing more than that.
Okay, so let's look at that architecture. Because
Yeah.
what struck me immediately is that Shifeng, he doesn't start his 2011 text with a biological definition of life.
No, he doesn't at all.
He starts with a linguistic one. He looks really closely at the actual Chinese character for the word fetus.
Yeah, the author uses the literal visual construction of the written word to basically build out his entire metaphysical argument.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. So in Chinese, the character for fetus, which is pronounced Tai, it's composed of two distinct visual parts. The left side of the character represents the word month,
Okay.
and the right side represents the word pavilion.
So if you put those together conceptually, a fetus literally translates to a pavilion, or like a house, that is built over a period of about 1 month.
Right, and he takes that etymology incredibly literally to establish his foundational premise.
Yeah.
To him, a fetus is merely a structural house.
Just the physical building.
Exactly. And following his timeline, zygotes, which are less than a month old, and embryos, which are under 2 months old, they cannot even be classified as fetuses yet.
Because the house isn't built yet.
Right. They're simply fertilized eggs. They're the building materials, not the completed pavilion.
Okay, so if we lean into that real estate analogy, early pregnancy is basically like pouring the concrete foundation on a vacant lot.
That's a good way to look at it.
Just because the concrete is drying doesn't mean a tenant actually lives there. It's an empty structure. But the text pushes this even further, doesn't it?
It pushes it much further.
Mm-hmm.
He states that an unfertilized egg is obviously not a life, comparing it to how, a chicken can only hatch from a fertilized egg.
Makes sense biologically.
Sure, but then he asks if a fertilized egg is a life, and I should point out he capitalizes that word throughout the text, and he gives an emphatic no.
And that is the part where I definitely have to push back on the text.
I figured you might.
Well, yeah, because the author argues that without self-awareness, a fertilized egg is no more alive than a man-made machine. And he specifically uses the examples of trains and cars.
He does, yeah.
But I mean, come on, is comparing organic, biological, cellular growth, like living cells, actively multiplying and dividing to a mechanical locomotive really a fair parallel? One is organic biology and the other is literally metal in gears.
Oh, it is a profoundly jarring comparison if you are evaluating it through the lens of modern biology.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't hold up there. However, if we step back and look at his broader philosophical framework, biological growth is completely irrelevant to his definition.
Wait, totally irrelevant.
Totally. For Schwiffing, life, again capitalized, is entirely synonymous with consciousness and the soul.
Meaning the physical cells dividing don't count for anything at all without a soul actually being present.
That is the core of his argument. Biological activity simply does not equal life for him. Without the soul, the body, no matter how organically complex or biologically active it is just an empty structure.
So it literally is just a biological machine to him.
Exactly. It is a train waiting for a conductor to step aboard.
Wow. Okay, so if the biological body is just an empty house waiting for a tenant, the soul must be a last-minute arrival, right? Is he arguing the soul just drops in on moving day right at birth?
Actually, close to it. And this is where he introduces a highly specific timeline. According to the essay, the spiritual entity, the soul, only enters the fetus about 10 days before birth.
10 days. Just 10 days.
Yep. And the text even details that most of the actual reincarnation process happens in the final 3 days before birth.
That is such a specific window.
It is. And the ramifications of that 10-day rule form the entire crux of his argument regarding abortion.
Because if the tenant isn't there?
Exactly. Because he believes the soul doesn't enter the biological house until the very end of the pregnancy, he concludes that abortion does not kill a life.
Wow.
In his metaphysical framework, the house is simply being demolished before the tenant ever had a chance to move in.
Which puts him in direct opposition to traditional religious views. I mean, he explicitly names Christianity and Buddhism in the text, stating that their views regarding abortion as a sin that kills a life are, and this is his quote, wrong because they do not reflect the facts.
Yes, and his use of the word facts there is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because he isn't citing medical facts, he is citing metaphysical logistics.
Metaphysical logistics, what does that even look like?
Well, he makes a mathematical argument about the carrying capacity of the afterlife.
Wait, like maximum occupancy for heaven?
Basically, he posits that if every single fertilized egg or early fetus were considered a full life with a soul, the entire spiritual system of heaven, hell, and reincarnation would completely collapse under the sheer volume.
Because of the incredibly high rate of natural miscarriages and abortions throughout human history.
Precisely. If billions of zygotes failed to implant naturally, and every single one of them possessed a full human soul, there would be this continuous, overwhelming flood of new souls being born into the physical world and then dying almost instantly.
That would be chaotic.
He argues the spiritual traffic jam would make the concepts of heaven and hell logistically impossible to manage. To his thinking, a soul would only ever get to live for a few days at a time.
So he just believes the universe's system isn't designed to be that inefficient?
Right. It's an argument from efficiency.
Okay, I understand the internal logic of his spiritual math, but here's where my skepticism really kicks in.
Let's hear it.
So the author lays out this extremely precise 10-day timeline for the soul entering the body. And to back it up, he writes, many cases from examples from throughout history in different cultures prove this.
Yes, he does write that.
And then he provides absolutely nothing. He doesn't name a single historical case, not one cultural example. Like, if you are reading this, how are you supposed to evaluate a claim of that magnitude when the text provides zero specific evidence?
I mean, the frustration is completely justified. The text leaps entirely over empirical evidence or historical citation. There are no footnotes here.
Not a single one.
But we have to remember the author's goal. He isn't trying to win a peer-reviewed science debate. He is using these metaphysical logistics, the capacity of heaven and hell, the flow of souls, to construct a closed logical loop.
So he's building his own rulebook.
Exactly. He is establishing a set of reincarnation rules that cleanly dictate the ethics of the physical world.
I hear that, but I'm still left wanting something tangible, It feels less like a proof and a bit more like a necessary rule he just had to invent to make his spiritual math work out.
That's a very fair critique.
But regardless of the lack of citations, if you follow his logic, it leads to perhaps the most surprising part of the 2011 essay, because we spend pages deep in the metaphysical weeds, right? Talking about souls, heaven, reincarnation logistics.
Right.
And then the text takes this incredibly sharp turn into pragmatic, real-world application.
It does. The essay abruptly shifts focus to a very specific terrestrial scenario. He brings up a young girl who becomes pregnant after having sex without any knowledge of contraception.
And Shifeng's response to this scenario isn't some theological debate. He literally pleads with the reader to stop preaching morality.
Yes, he's very direct about that.
He argues that in this specific situation, abstract morality is entirely useless, and society should only consider the practical physical ramifications of whether she should carry the pregnancy to term.
And he issues a very direct, provocative challenge to anti-abortion advocates along those lines.
Oh, it's a huge challenge.
He asks a logistical question. If you oppose the abortion, are you personally willing to take responsibility for the nursing, rearing, and financial support of her child?
Just laying it all out there.
Yes. And if you aren't willing to do that, but you still speak loudly against abortion, he basically questions where exactly your moral responsibility actually lies.
I mean, going from calculating the maximum occupancy of souls in heaven to demanding practical socioeconomic childcare solutions in the span of a few paragraphs, that is a massive pivot.
It's a whiplash moment for sure.
It really is. And then he ends that 2011 essay with a brief mention of something called Lifechanyuan, calling it the final course for human beings.
Ah, yes. That mention of Lifechanyuan is really the connective tissue to his broader philosophy.
What is it exactly?
The text frames it as a structured spiritual curriculum, or almost like a utopian destination that humanity is supposedly moving toward.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate goal of his belief system.
Okay, so if we manage to accept his premise that a fetus is just an empty house, right, and the soul arrives at the very last minute, the next logical hurdle for me is figuring out what happens when the soul actually does arrive.
When the tenant finally gets the keys.
Right. If Lifechanyuan is the final destination, what are the rules for living inside the house once the tenant moves in?
And that question perfectly forms the bridge to our second source, the 2017 essay, Clear the Passage of Life.
Okay.
Because once the tenant, the soul, moves into the house, the ultimate objective is to eventually elevate that soul to heaven. And getting to heaven, according to Shuafeng, requires a radical, extreme kind of spiritual maintenance.
And this is where the 2017 essay introduces a brand new core metaphor. So we've moved past the house concept. Now life, again, capitalized, meaning consciousness or the soul, is described as a non-material structure. It's a passage, or like a pipeline.
Yes, a pipeline.
Yeah.
He sets up a stark binary contrast here. A life that is bound for heaven has a passage that is completely clear and uninhibited.
Nice and smooth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas a life bound for hell has a passage that is filled with extra clutter and is badly blocked.
And he uses the most mundane, everyday analogy possible to explain this grand cosmic concept. He compares human consciousness to a kitchen drain.
I know, it is mundane, but it's highly effective.
It paints a picture.
It does. If a kitchen or washroom drain is clogged with garbage, water can't flow. The pipe becomes entirely useless. The only way to restore its function is to remove the garbage.
Just scoop it out.
Right. And he applies this directly to the soul. Once extra clutter enters your passage of life, you become weak, rigid, corrupted, and eventually useless.
So if you're listening to this and you're trying to picture your own spiritual plumbing, you're probably wondering what actually counts as garbage in this scenario.
Oh, the garbage list is intense.
The author gives us a list of 8 types of clutter that block the passage. And I have to say, when I read this list, my jaw literally hit the floor.
The list escalates very quickly from, the expected tenets of asceticism to the profoundly disruptive.
Okay, so he starts with emotions, right? Joy, anger, sorrow, fear. Standard emotional detachment? Sure.
Pretty common in philosophy.
Right. Then he lists property, money, reputation, status, and power. Again, very classic philosophy. Don't be greedy, don't chase wealth. We've heard all that before.
Yes.
But then he gets to the third type of clutter, and he lists Tao, virtue, benevolence, righteousness, courtesy, and faith.
And he doesn't stop there.
No, he keeps going. Type 4 includes your relatives, your families, your nationalities, and your political parties.
All clutter.
Type 5 is your ideals, your successes, and your targets. Type 6 is all of your accumulated knowledge, education, and experience.
It basically systematically dismantles everything a person is traditionally taught to value in life.
Okay, let's play with this plumbing metaphor for a second. If education and virtue are like grease in the spiritual drain, does that mean every time we learn a new philosophy or adopt a noble moral stance or prioritize our family, we are basically pouring bacon fat down the sink?
That is exactly what he's saying.
But how can being a virtuous person or loving your family act as a clog? I just can't wrap my head around that.
To understand that mechanism, we have to look at the philosophical core he introduces early in the essay. Feng quotes the concept, "By the non-existence of things, we are served."
What does that mean in practice?
It means for something to be truly useful, it must be empty. Think of a cup. A cup is only useful because of the empty space inside it. If the cup is already full of rocks, even very pretty, highly valuable rocks, it cannot hold water.
Emptiness is what actually gives it utility.
Yes, and Feng applies this radically to human consciousness. Any attachment, even an attachment to something we universally agree is good, like benevolence or family duty or a righteous political cause, it takes up space in your pipeline.
It fills the cup.
Exactly. It creates an identity. It makes the soul rigid and defensive. It creates a sense of ownership.
Oh, I see.
If you're clinging tightly to your virtues, your passage is blocked by your own ego regarding those virtues. You aren't letting universal truth flow through you. You are trapping it.
So if I dedicate my life to a noble cause, Shuefeng says I'm clogging my drain because my identity is now tangled up in being the person who supports that cause.
You've hit on the absolute core friction of his argument. An identity built on being good is still an identity. It still creates boundaries and possessiveness.
That completely flips conventional morality on its head. I mean, he isn't just delivering a standard morality tale about avoiding greed here.
Not at all.
He is arguing that literally everything you hold fast to, your entire worldview, your cherished traditions, the very knowledge you've spent your whole life accumulating, all of it is actively preventing mankind from achieving peace.
And to validate this extreme stance, he attempts to unify the core teachings of major historical and religious figures. He basically argues they were all secretly saying the exact same thing.
What does he point to?
Well, he points to Lao Li, the founder of Taoism, summarizing his core teaching as returning to being a baby, which is a state of total emptiness, lacking any preconceived notions.
Okay, returning to a baby. And then he brings in Sakyamuni, the Buddha, quoting the idea that one's mind shouldn't abide in form, sound, smell, or dharma. You basically shouldn't abide in anything.
Right. And he includes Jesus as well, focusing on the biblical teaching that to be converted and enter heaven, you must become as a little child.
So for Shuefeng, all these figures from wildly different traditions were ultimately offering the exact same plumbing advice. You have to unclog the drain of your adult attachments.
That's his thesis.
He even pulls Albert Einstein into this.
Oh, yes, the Einstein quote.
He quotes Einstein as saying that what prevented him from thinking was the education he had received.
And that quote perfectly encapsulates the paradox of unlearning that Shuefeng is pushing. He argues that in the real world, the more possessions you own, the less freedom, elegance, and flexibility you have.
And he absolutely means intellectual and moral possessions as much as physical ones.
100%. The more clutter in your consciousness, the more stubborn and conservative you become. You get stuck in your ways. You become terrified of stepping outside the limits of your own education.
And the tragedy, according to him, is that a life burdened by all these attachments, even the incredibly noble ones we talked about, actually becomes more miserable and tiring. You just spend your whole life defending your clutter.
Yes. And connecting this to the bigger picture of his mission, he makes a rather bold, almost messianic claim at the end of the 2017 essay.
What does he say?
He states that he fully understands the broad way to heaven. He claims to know exactly how mankind can avoid disasters and realize sustainable development. But he laments very few people actually believe his words.
And the reason they don't believe him isn't because he's wrong, at least in his view.
Right.
It's because their passages of life are simply too stuffed. They have too much education, too many traditions, too many pre-existing views on morality to let his truth flow through. They literally lack the internal empty space required to understand him.
So his ultimate conclusion is a prescription for the reader. If you want a better life, and if you want your soul to eventually arrive in heaven, the very first step isn't to learn more or to go out and do more good deeds.
What is it?
The first step is to aggressively clear your own passage. You have to unlearn.
Wow. I mean, it has been a wild, totally counterintuitive journey mapping out the logic in these two texts today.
It really is a unique framework.
We started by looking at the physical body, the fetus, as an empty pavilion, a biological house just waiting under construction for a soul to move in at the very last minute.
Right.
And we explored how that specific timeline challenges everything society argues about the biological start of life and how it really relies on the logistical capacity of reincarnation.
And then we transition into what happens once that soul actually inhabits the body,
Oh.
viewing the adult mind not as a treasure chest meant to be filled with wisdom, but as a plumbing system that must be completely emptied.
Emptied of all attachments, all education, and all ideals, just to ensure it maintains the flexibility to reach its final destination.
It highlights a massive tension in the human experience, honestly. We spend our entire lives trying to fill our houses. We want to fill them with knowledge, with deep family relationships, with virtues and righteous causes.
Because we genuinely believe that is the point of living.
Exactly. But this philosophy argues the exact opposite. It insists that true spiritual freedom, elegance, and peace only come from aggressively clearing all of that out.
Which brings us all the way back to that image we started with at the top of the show. The pristine, perfectly organized library full of knowledge versus the chaotic, cluttered storage unit.
The two spaces.
If true spiritual freedom actually requires emptying our consciousness of absolutely all knowledge, all views, and all education, it leaves me with a real paradox for you listeners.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Think about what you and I are doing right now. Does the very act of studying these essays, of analyzing this dense philosophy, of you listening to this deep dive to learn something new, does it actually clutter our own passages of life?
Are we pouring grease down our own spiritual pipes just by trying so hard to understand how the plumbing works?
It is definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself clinging tightly to an idea or a piece of knowledge. Take a look around your own mental house today and see if you can figure out what might be clogging your passage. We'll catch you next time.